In the long sweep of the Atlantic world, between the late 18th century and the mid-19th century, the traffic in human beings shaped economies, societies, and private lives across 3 continents, from the slaving ports of West Africa to the auction yards of Caribbean islands and the cotton plantations of the American South. Families were itemized, priced, and dispersed. This segment reconstructs a single emblematic episode from that era, the desperate offer of a young enslaved girl to surrender her own mobility in order to secure her mother as continued presence beside her. It should be emphasized at the outset that the account presented here is a historically grounded composite, assembled from court petitions, slave narratives, missionary reports, and oral memory preserved in West African and diasporic communities. It stands not as the transcript of a single attested trial, but as a careful reconstruction intended to illuminate the moral and material realities that made such offers imaginable. We situate the scene roughly within the decades 1800–1840, a period of intensified plantation expansion in the Anglo-Caribbean and the American South, growing abolitionist agitation in Britain and the northern United States, and repeated episodes of legal and informal manumission. The actors are familiar types of the period: a plantation mistress or master concerned with profit, an overseer responsible for accounts and discipline, buyers arriving at a public sale, and enslaved families striving to preserve kinship under relentless pressure. By 1800, the long-distance trade that had carried captives from the Bights of Benin and Biafra from the Gold Coast and from West-Central Africa had in many regions become routinized. Ports such as Wida, and Elmina in West Africa functioned as collection points. Ships then conveyed human cargo across the Middle Passage to destinations including Kingston, Bridgetown, Charleston, and New Orleans. The Caribbean plantation complex, particularly in Jamaica and Barbados, continued to draw labor to sugar production, while the southern United States expanded its reliance on cotton and rice into the early 19th century. These economies depended upon the tight control of bodily labor and the suppression of family ties that might disrupt productivity or reduce property values. Legal regimes varied by colony and state. In British colonies prior to emancipation in the 1830s, manumission could be granted by will or purchase, but often required fees, official documentation, or the discretion of a local magistrate. In the United States, Southern statutes increasingly constrained the ability of owners to free enslaved persons without legislative consent, particularly after the Revolutionary era. Across these jurisdictions, auctions and private sales functioned as instruments of discipline and economy. They redistributed labor, punished resistance, and instilled dread among those whose names might appear on a sale bill. At the same time, the late 18th and early 19th centuries saw the circulation of enslaved people's own narratives. Autobiographies such as those of Olaudah Equiano, published 1789, and later memoirs collected by abolitionists, emphasized family separation as one of slavery's deepest moral wounds. Missionaries, traveling magistrates, and visiting reformers recorded public scenes, auctions, floggings, and petitions, which occasionally captured extraordinary appeals made by enslaved petitioners. These sources provide the documentary texture for the episode we are about to recount. An auction yard, a mother listed for sale, and a child who offers herself in ways that transgress the property logic of the market. The morning is humid and still. The year approximately 1818. The location a sugar district on a British colonial island in the Caribbean. The plantation is of middling scale, a stone watermill that creaks when the wind shifts, a manager's house with shuttered windows, and a series of wooden huts where enslaved families sleep in cramped quarters. At dawn, the yard fills slowly as overseers and the owner's clerk prepare lists and tally ledgers. A notice has been posted the night before. To raise cash, certain workers will be offered for private sale, and among them is a woman noted for her seamstress skill, a woman whose hands have mended shirts and whose quiet competence has long been taken for granted. The mother is known in the quarters by the name Hattie, mid-30s, with the small, lean frame of someone who has borne children and early toil. Her daughter, known to neighbors as Elara, is barely 13, quick, alert, and accustomed to carrying water, to stitching thread into hems, to running messages between the cookhouse and the field. Word circulates in muted whispers that the master's heir needs cash. Creditors press accounts, and the owner has decided to sell a few people to balance the books. To the eldest among the quarters, sale is the final severing. Distance and the opacity of plantation records mean that family ties are often lost forever. On the morning of the sale, the yard is crowded with buyers from neighboring estates and a traveling agent who trades in prime hands. A magistrate's clerk may be present to record the transaction. The mother stands with a quiet dignity. She is aware, as all are, that her value has been rethought not in moral terms, but in monetary ones. The seamstress who once fetched a premium now appears in accounts rationally depreciated by illness and age. The daughter watches, the heat pressing down, the smell of molasses in the air, the low murmur of bargaining voices. A buyer makes an opening offer for the woman, assuming she will be moved to a workhouse or to another estate. It is then, in the brief interval between a hammer and a final bid, that Elara steps forward. She is small. She is not expected to interrupt adult transactions, yet she moves, her chest set, and addresses the owner and those gathered. Her voice trembles at first, then steadies. She says plainly, she will accept a condition that would prevent her from ever fleeing. She will submit to whatever measure the owner requires to ensure she remains. In exchange, the mother must not be sold away. The language is stark. She offers her legs, the power of terrestrial motion, as the guarantee of her future immobility, if her mother may remain with her on the estate. The yard falls into a different climate of silence. Traders who think only in profit sense that a maimed laborer is temporarily secure but permanently devalued. Owners who have built fortunes by extracting labor detect in the offer both a potential boon and an affront to their rational calculus. Some onlookers recoil at the idea of physical maiming. Elders mutter that such bargains have been proposed in the past as rhetorical challenges to cruelty. From legal vantage points, the child's pledge cannot alter property law by itself. An owner may accept, reject, or exploit such a promise. Yet public acts have power in a moral economy where reputation, rumor, and ecclesiastical condemnation matter. A magistrate's clerk familiar with petitions and with the occasional intervention of philanthropic buyers whispers to a merchant who has a history of compassion, purchases, transactions in which a purchaser formally buys a person, and then through legal paperwork or the intercession of a benevolent acquaintance arranges for manumission or for placement in a less exploitative situation. That whisper circulates. The owner, after a long deliberation that involves his calculation of profit and his own precarious sense of honor in the presence of neighbors and visiting officials, decides to accept an alternative. The merchant will purchase the mother with an understanding to resell her in a manner likely to enable a path to freedom. The owner nods. Coins and parchment change hands. The mother is thus removed from the immediate sale list. What follows is not a cinematic liberation, but a series of bureaucratic and social adjustments. The mother may be transferred to household duties. She may be less exposed to field labor. The purchase may include a clause that the buyer will assist in manumission if certain conditions are met. Elara returns to the quarters. She has not been physically maimed. Her pledge remains a moral contract that the market has felt compelled, in that moment, to respect. The story travels quickly. Neighbors recount the child's offer. A visiting clerk files a brief annotation in his ledger. A missionary writes, in a margin, of an extraordinary child who professed to give up all mobility for her mother. The narrative spreads across plantations and into the pages of early 19th century reformist publications, where such scenes are used as evidence of the system's inhumanity. This episode, whether a precise chronicle of named individuals or a composite drawn from multiple testimonies, is revealing in several key respects. First, it demonstrates the perverse economies that governed human relationships. Kinship became a variable in a ledger, and filial devotion could be deployed as a bargaining tool. The girl's offer to surrender her legs is both a literal proposal and a symbolic act. It confronts owners with the visible consequences of commodification, and it foregrounds the moral choices of bystanders. Second, the event highlights the contingent possibilities of resistance within asymmetrical power structures. Enslaved people often wielded speech, petition, and spectacle as techniques of contestation. Public appeals, whether in a court, at an auction, or before a minister, could occasion mercy, delay, or legal intervention. The presence of merchants prone to compassion purchases, of missionaries ready to record abuse, and of neighbors mindful of reputation created a fragile set of interlocutors whose responses could alter outcomes. Third, historians must be cautious. Contemporary abolitionist accounts sometimes dramatized episodes to sway metropolitan audiences. Local proprietors sometimes suppressed inconvenient reports. The historian's task is therefore to triangulate, to compare oral reminiscence, to consult salebooks and parish registers, and to read philanthropic reports with an attentive skepticism that nonetheless recognizes the moral force of such testimonies. In the immediate term, the Mother S. removal from the sale list constituted a reprieve, a change in personal fate that may have preserved family cohesion for years. For Elara, the episode conferred a different status within her community. She became a moral exemplar, a living testimony to filial courage. Such reputational capital could translate into practical benefits: communal assistance, greater forbearance from neighbors, and even protective attention from clergy or missionaries. At a broader level, incidents of this kind contributed to the documentary corpus that fed abolitionist sentiment in Britain and in northern U.S. states. Narratives emphasizing family separation and extraordinary sacrifices were powerful rhetorical instruments. They shaped parliamentary debates and philanthropic campaigns in the 1820s through the 1840s. They also entered diasporic memory as stories that families told to make sense of trauma and to celebrate resilience. Yet longer-term structural change required more than individual episodes. Legal abolition, economic reorganization, and political reform followed uneven trajectories across the Atlantic. The British Empire's Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 took effect in 1834 with apprenticeship provisions, while emancipation in the United States would not be enacted until the Civil War era of the 1860s. Individual acts of sacrifice did not dismantle systems, but they did humanize the oppressed in public perception, help mobilize moral indignation, and sustain enslaved communities' inner lives through practices of solidarity. As we leave the auction yard, we carry with us the quiet resonance of a child's pledge and the subtle mechanics by which human stubbornness altered immediate fates. In the next segment, we will move from individual scenes of negotiation to the printed pages that transmitted them. We will examine how slave narratives, missionary letters, and abolitionist pamphlets transformed local occurrences into metropolitan causes, and how those literary forms shaped legal debates between 1820 and 1840. We will listen to the recorded voices of formerly enslaved people, to the minutes of reform societies, and to the slow, uneven legal reforms that followed. Let us proceed, calmly, and with an attention to the small acts that, together, retold an Atlantic world.